Assalamualaikum. I am Rohaifa Alamada, members of Group 12, and we are assigned in Chapter 11, and my assigned topic is about global inequality. Before we proceed to our discussion, let us first know the learning outcomes. At the end of this lesson, students can able to determine the global inequality based on migration, e-West inequality, race, ethnicity, and gender. Understand the bottom billion and global digital divide, and to differentiate race, ethnicity, and gender. So what is global inequality? It is an inequality between people across countries. Alam naman nating lahat kung ano yung pakahulugan ng inequality. From the word inequality, ito yung hindi pagiging pantay or hindi pagiging patas na trato between people across countries. For example is that the relationship between the North and the South, kumbaga, North considered as the wealthy countries than, although South also can consider, but North is much higher than the South. North America's wealth is increasingly concentrated among its richest citizens while the middle class slowly disappears. Global inequality involved the concentrations of resources in certain nations, significantly affecting the opportunities of individuals in poorer and less powerful countries. And now let us proceed to the bottom billion. The most common ways of looking at economic inequality in the world is to focus on the difference between the North and the South, just like what as I've said that between the North and the South, much riches ang North than the South. Although South, may mga riches din sa South, but North is much riches than the South. And the relationship between the core and periphery, which is periphery is a small share of the world's wealth. Kumbaga, maituturing din ang periphery as less developed country, such as the Bangladesh, Central Africa, Ghana, India, Indonesia, at kasali na rin dito yung Philippines. And the core, which is the wealthy countries that generate a lot of wealth, such as Australia, France, German, Hong Kong, China, Japan, at marami pa. And or between the developed or less developed areas of the world. The North, the South, core, periphery, and developed and less developed ay pare-pareho lang sila ng definitions when it comes in this topic. However, Paul Kohler argues that making that gross distinctions, yung pagkakaiba nito, that we ignore poorest people in the world is that what we call the bottom billion. Ang bottom billion ay nangangahulugan ng poorest people. Kumbaga sila yung nakaka-experience ng poverty, kahirapan within the countries. 70% of people in the bottom billions ay nakatira sa Africa or matatagpuan sa Africa. Among the others countries such as Haiti, Bolivia, Laos, North Korea, and Yemen. Many other serious problems that experience in that particular bottom billion, such as the low life expectancy, yung high infant mortality, maraming mga bata na namamatay, and also it is more likely to show symptoms of malnutrition. Yung mga bata ay makikitaan ng sintomas ng malnutrition. And let us proceed to what is migration. One of the consequences of inequality is migration. It is usually happen to the South and the North. Ang migration is ito yung pag-move or yung paglipat ng mga tao sa ibang bansa. For example, yung bottom billion nakaka-experience or nakakaranas ng extreme poverty. So they choose to move or migrate in other countries para doon na sila manirahan at maghanap ng trabaho. Kasi doon sa affluent area country na yon, mas malaki yung makukuha nilang pera. So in order to sustain their everyday life, they choose or improve their economic status, they choose to migrate in other countries doon sa affluent areas para at least ma-sustain nila yung pangangailangan nila. So however, those in the bottom billion na nagmamigrate, are often forced to flee their homeland to migrate to another countries and fleeing their countries and of course much of that migration much of that migration na tinatawag natin is hindi siya is not usually happen to north to south, but rather south to south migration. So what is my south to south migrations? It is a movement of people from poorer southern countries to somewhat better off southern countries. From the word south to south. Doon ito yung pag-move ng mga tao, kumbaga yung poor, yung mahihirap sa southern countries, they move to somewhat better off dito din sa southern country. For example is that Nepal and India. Alam naman natin na ang Nepal ay kumbaga ang Nepal is much poor kaysa sa India. Kumbaga ang India is mas lamang ang India sa wealthy than the Nepal. So Nepal people migrate to India para doon na sila maghanap ng trabaho. So those worker na sumasali sa migration na migration na yan is usually nakukuha nilang trabaho is gaya lamang ng constructions, harvesting crops, digging mines, cleaning homes at tending fields. So as I've said that one of the reason why people move to south migrations including push factors such as war and political crisis at home. And the full factors such as the availability of the work. As I've said that yung trabaho na nakukuha nila in order to gain a higher pay of salary doon sa destination na country na yon. And now let us proceed to E-West and inequality. Another dimensions of inequality in this realm involve E-West or yung tinatawag nating electronic West. For example, ng E-West is yung computer, our cell phones, printer, yung televisions, yung microwave at marami pang iba. It's laced with all sorts of hazardous and toxic materials. The reason is that developed countries much prefer to shift the hazardous materials out of their domains and away from their populations. Further, it is much cheaper to have e-waste processed in less developed countries than in developed countries. So ang paghulugan nito is that yung developed countries, yung e-waste na nasa-shift ng developed countries is ini-export nila sa less developed countries. So yung mga tao sa less developed countries na yan ay ginagrab na nila yung opportunity na trabaho involved ang e-waste. Even napakadelikado siya. So yung mga tao they choose to engage themselves doon sa trabaho na yon in order for them to have an income, at yung income na nakukuha nila they believe that it will improve their economic situations. So, the hazardous work involved in extracting useful parts and metals from old computer technology that provides them an income for the large numbers in the less developed world. And now let us talk about what is global digital divide. It is one of the most important contemporary consequences and causes of global inequality. When we say global digital divide, it is a disparities primarily between developed and developing countries. Ito yung pagkakaiba ng developed at ang developing country with regards to access in computers and information resources. For example, is ang internet connections at saka yung teknolohiya. The poor countries are often cannot afford or even do not have the electricity needed to be run computers to give them internet access. Poor countries kasi kumbaga hindi nila ma-afford na maka-access sa internet access while sa rich country ay much advanced na sila when it comes to technology. For example, isang China at saka ang Korea. Makikita natin kung gaano sila ka-advanced when it comes to internet access and to the technology. On the other hand, the lack of advanced technology, especially when we talk about the North and the South. As we all know that North is one of the richest at saka mas advanced na sila sa teknolohiya, means that the South continues to fall further behind the North economically. So yung ang North na kung saan advanced na sila sa teknolohiya, marami na silang na-adapt. So yung nag-grow na rin yung kanilang ekonomiya. While sa South much less developed pa sila when it comes to technology. So behind ang South sa North. So the global inequality is increasing between the North and the South. There is a great inequality in the world in terms of access and use of internet as well as the computers, to say nothing of other digital technology. As I've said that between the North and the South, kumbaga ang North ay mas advanced na sila sa teknolohiya, malaki na yung income lumalaki na yung kanilang ekonomiya than the South. Kasi ang South kasi is still nagpa-progress pa sila or develop pa sila. The main barrier to global inequality in internet access and use are the lack of infrastructure within less developed countries and the low income in those areas. All of those aspects of internet use are not unequally distributed among nations of the world. For example, dito sa Philippines. Yung internet access natin dito is hindi siya stable. Kumbaga pahirapan yung access natin sa internet. Unlike sa developed countries, sa China, sa Korea or sa America, yung internet access nila is very stable. Kumbaga hindi siya nawawala, tuloy-tuloy lang yung internet access nila. At saka sa developed country is much advanced na sila sa teknolohiya. So with the help of this technology, mas nag-increase pa yung ekonomiya nila with the help of this technology. Also, language also represents another source of inequality on the internet. Why? Because the vast majority of the web pages in the internet is English. A small number in other languages such as German, French, Japanese, and at marami pang iba. So those people na hindi masyado makaintindi ng language na ito, especially yung English, are huge para sa kanila, huge disadvantage yun sa kanila when it comes in accessing internet. And they also find internet as totally inaccessible because of this language barrier. And now let us talk about the race, ethnicity, and gender. And let us differentiate between the race and ethnicity. So ang race ay bumabase tayo sa physical or biological. For example, kung ano yung color of their skin, such as kung ito ba ay black or white. Ang ethnic group naman ay bumabase sa cultural characteristic. Kasali na dito yung religious belief at saka practice, kung paano sila manamit, kung paano sila kumain, and their sexual behavior. The race and ethnicity, pumapasok or still nag-exist pa rin si racism at si ethnicism. It is a belief in the inherent superiority of the racial group and inferiority of others. Racism and ethnicism serve as similar functions. Kumbaga, ang racism at ethnicism is also considered as discriminations and prejudice among the groups. Functions in social discriminations. Both define the others as inherently different from and inferior to the dominant group in the society. Racial and ethnic minorities are sometimes seen as subhumans. They are denied humans' qualities. They are seen as destructive of not only human values but human life. Kumbaga, these racisms and ethnicisms, ito yung discriminations between the race and the ethnicity. Racism and ethnicism are often accompanied by xenophobia. So what is xenophobia? It is involves the beliefs, attitudes, and prejudice that reject, exclude, and vilify groups that are outsider or foreigners to the dominant social group. Ang xenophobia is ito yung fear of stranger. Usually na-experience ito ng mga foreigners or yung mga outsiders doon sa particular group in a society. Xenophobia sometimes leads to violence. Racism, ethnicism, and xenophobia are manifest in such diverse forms such as murders, physical attacks, hate speech, denials of entry to stores, restaurants, clubs, and denial of to access of employment. The most important similarity between racial and ethnic groups from the perspective of this analysis is the way in which they relate to majority and minority issue. When we say majority and minority, ito yung dami na kabilang sa group of this society. For example, the case of the white-black distinctions sa America, for example, kung saan sa Amerika, karamihan sa kanila ay lahat mapuputi. So these proportions of majority is whites. So matatawag nating minority doon is yung colors. Another example is dito sa Pilipinas. So dito sa Pilipinas, ang majority is lahat Filipino. So ang matatawag nating minority is yung mga tao na pumupunta or yung mga foreigners from other country na babakasyon or naninirahan dito. So yun yung majority and minority issue. Kung ano yung dami na rumerepresent sa society. Societies have been in the front of these discussions of race and ethnicity. In terms of race, South Africa was long a focus of these attentions because of its systems of apartheid. When we say apartheid, it is a formal system of separate developments for whites and black that serves to perpetuate both white privilege and power and black subordinate and weaknesses. Ang apartheid ito yung sistema na nagsiseparate between the whites and black na kung saan this apartheid serves perpetuate both white privilege, kumbaga mas malaya yung white at saka kumbaga mayroon silang power to subordinate, while ang black subordinations and weakness, kumbaga yung mga black is considered as weaknesses sila. Then this apartheid was formally abolished or tinanggal nila ang sistema na ito in 1991. But its history and legacy continue to be important in analysis and discussions of race in South Africa. This apartheid usually nangyayari yan sa South Africa. Yung separations development ng white and the black. Kumbaga maituturing na mas may power ang white than the black. Special importance in this context is the global flow of people from various racial and ethnic groups, as well as the global flow of ideas such as racism. Pluralism, ito yung idea na kung saan ang different races and ethnic group can live together. Kumbaga, still nag-exist pa rin ang race at ethnicity na kung saan pwede na silang maghalo within the society. So, the existence of so many identities on the global stage has increased. So, yung identities ay kumbaga umi-increase na yung possibility of people having hybrid identities. When we say hybrid, ito yung pagkahalo-halo ng identity. They identify not only with ethnic group but also they identify their gender, race, and sexual orientations. These hybrid identities may lead to the more complex identities and to the greater likelihood of internal conflict. Mas complex na siya. Ethnic identities may seem as threatened by globalizations. It is also enhanced and spread by the process. For example, sa pamamagitan ng pagdevelop ng forms of communications and media, globalizations now allow the diasporic group spread throughout the world, not only to retain their ethnic identity, but to develop it more strongly, perhaps even more strongly than those in the motherlands. Furthermore, the powerful sense of ethnic identity can be exported back to the homes of the country through the same forms of global media. For today, with more members of ethnic groups in more and more countries, this is the potentials of a great increase in the number, if not the intensity of ethnic conflicts. Historically, efforts to deal with ethnic minorities have occurred with the nation states or other delimited territories. Most extreme cases involve the exterminations or yung tinatawag nating genocide. So what is genocide? It is an act committed with the intent to destroy a national or ethnic or a racial or a religious group. Ang genocide from the word genus, which is a race, tribe, or nations, and side, which means that killing. Ito yung destructive of a group of people because of their ethnicity. Ang examples ng genocide is yung nangyari between Philippines governments and Moros. It was started in 1972 na kung saan ang 28 Muslim Moros were killed. And so the Philippines government tried to get or having yung lugar ng mga Moros. Kumbaga, gusto nilang kunin yung lugar na tinitirhan ng mga Moros. So that is why the 28 Muslim Moros were killed. One of the process of greatest concerns in the context of ethnicity and globalizations is ethnic cleansing. So what is ethnic cleansing? It is a forcibly removing people of another ethnic country. Ito yung forcibly na pinapaalis nila yung mga tao doon sa ethnic group na yon. For example, is another way of dealing with ethnic minorities expulsion. There are two forms for expulsions. The first one is direct with minority. Kumbaga, when we say direct, ito yung forcibly or pinapaalis na nila yung minority group. Yung majority, pinapaalis na nila yung minority group forcibly. The second is yung minority can leave voluntarily. Volunteer na sila na umalis doon at because of being harassed, discriminated, and persecuted nasa nila in majority group. Cleansing is defined in terms similar to those used to define expulsions as the various policies of forcibly removing people of another ethnic. And turning to gender and its relationship to social definitions, we first need to distinguish gender and sex. So, ang sex refers to the physical differences between males and female. Kung ano yung physical appearance between males and female. For example, yung lalaki, yung Adam's apples. And also, it refers to the biological characteristic of males and females such as yung reproductive organs, yung chromosomes, and yung hormones, at saka marami pa. While the gender it is talk about the social definitions and social distinctions, constructed characteristic of women such as yung norms, yung rules nila, at saka yung relationship nila between group of women and men. Kung paano sila makihalo sa mga kapwa nila babae at sa kapwa nila lalaki. Gender distinctions are used to organize the social world and to affect often adversely women. Kumbaga, yung pagkakaiba ng gender is usually na-organize siya sa social world. Babae is mas affluent sila when it comes to work. One of the greatest interests from point of view of this chapter is the way gender differences are used to advantage in men and disadvantage women. Kasi usually ang women ay nakaka-experience or nakakaranas ng physical abuse by the men. Kumbaga, yung act of violence against women. And now let us proceed to the next slide. Gender and economy. One of the key effects of globalizations is the transportations of the natures of economic activity. And the greater involvement ng mga kababaihan in the global paid labor market is very observable in terms and the variety of occupations and professions and service sector. Mapapansin natin in the service sector, mas madami yung nag-work na babae kaysa sa mga lalaki. Feminizations of labor refers to the rise of female labor participations in all sectors and the movements of women into jobs traditionally held by men. Kumbaga, traditional work ng mga kalalakihan is ngayon mas ina-adapt or mas wino-work na ngayon or nakakayanan gawin na ngayon ng mga kababaihan. This global trend has occurred in both developing and developed countries. So sa developed countries, yung educated middle class nila have made inroads in professions and managerial employments, resulting in declines in the difference between male and female labor participation rates. Kung professions and managerial employment, mas demand na ngayon yung kababaihan rather than the kalalakihan. So the definitions of labors in the developing economies is often accompanied by the feminizations of poverty and by the female militarizations. And many of those economies, women increased participations in paid employments is caused mainly by the shift from the import substitutions to export-oriented manufacture. Kumbaga, mga kababaihan ngayon, mas rumarami na yung pag-participate nila sa paid of employment. Perspective of globalizations is the place of women in what has been called the global assembly line, in which research and management are controlled by the core and developed, while assembly line work is relegated to semi-periphery nations that occupy less privileged positions in the global economy. So, gender and economy, kumbaga, mas rumarami yung kababaihan when it comes in the service sector rather than the kalalakihan. Because ang mga kababaihan, even it is very risky or very napakadelikadong gawain, they choose to grab that opportunity in order to have a higher pay of salary rather than the men na kung saan maka-experience lang sila ng harassment or abuse. They manage to attack. That is why yung mga kalalakihan madali sila, kumbaga, when it comes sa trabaho, madali silang ma-irritate rather than the kababaihan na mas matiisin kaysa sa mga lalaki. Now let us proceed to the next slide. The export process zone are special industrial areas often in developing countries designed to draw foreign companies and capital investments. EPGs offer multinational companies and incentives including exemptions from labor and environmental regulations, taxes, tariffs, and quotas. Ang export processing zones is ito yung custom area where na kung saan nag-a-allow or pumapayag sila na mag-import ng mga plants, mga machinery, mga equipments, mga materials for the manufacture of export goods under security without payments of duty. So APGs mainly focused on the productions of textile, clothing, and electronic for the mass market. Usually nakaantabay sila sa production ng mga style, yung mga tela, yung mga damit, at saka yung mga electronic for the mass market. And that's the end of my report. Thank you and have a nice day.